In this video, we will explore the cases of the oldest prisoners executed in United States history, those who spent decades on death row or committed their crimes late in life before facing the ultimate punishment. We'll examine their crimes, their final words, and the last meals they requested before their executions. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel to never miss a video, and let's get into it.
And time heals all wounds, that's not exactly true.
Walter Moody, Jr., 83. State, Alabama. On April 19, 2018, 83-year-old Walter Leroy Moody, Jr. became the oldest person executed in the United States since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Moody's path to death row began on December 16, 1989, when he mailed pipe bombs to targets across the southeastern United States. His first victim was federal appeals court judge Robert Vance, who opened a package at his home in Mountain Brook, Alabama. The explosion killed Judge Vance instantly and seriously injured his wife, Helen. 2 days later, civil rights attorney Robert Robinson opened a similar package at his office in Savannah, Georgia.
Getting the lethal injection, it was designed to be quick and painless. My dad's death was not quick and painless.
The blast tore through the office, killing Robinson and traumatizing his colleagues. Moody had also sent bombs to the NAACP office in Jacksonville, Florida, and to the federal courthouse in Atlanta, though these were intercepted before causing casualties. The bombings triggered one of the largest federal investigations in history. Over 100 agents worked the case, eventually tracing the bombs to Moody through forensic evidence and his purchase history of bomb-making materials. Investigators discovered Moody had a decades-long grudge against the federal judiciary. In 1972, he had been convicted of possessing a pipe bomb after his first wife was injured in an explosion at their home. He blamed judges and attorneys for his conviction, spending years plotting revenge. During his 1996 trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Moody had meticulously planned the bombings, even creating a fictitious group called Americans for a Free America to claim responsibility and deflect suspicion from himself. The jury convicted Moody on 71 counts, including capital murder. He spent 22 years on death row, exhausting all appeals while maintaining his innocence. For his last meal, Moody requested Philly cheesesteaks, Dr. Pepper, and M&Ms. When asked for final words before his execution, the 83-year-old simply said, "No." At 8:42 p.m., Moody was pronounced dead, ending one of the longest waits on death row in American history. Bigler Stauffer, 79. State, Oklahoma. On December 9, 2021, 79-year-old Bigler Job Bud Stauffer II was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, becoming one of the oldest inmates executed in modern U.S. history. Stauffer's crime occurred on May 28, 1985, in Oklahoma City. He shot and killed 73-year-old schoolteacher Linda Reeves, who was also his girlfriend, and Doug Ivins, 38, who was visiting her home at the time. The murders were the culmination of a volatile relationship. Stauffer had become increasingly possessive and jealous of Reeves, suspecting her of seeing other men. When he found Ivins at her home that evening, he flew into a rage. Using a .38 caliber revolver, Stauffer shot both victims multiple times. Neighbors heard the shots and called police, who found Stauffer still at the scene. He initially claimed self-defense, but later admitted to the killings. At trial, prosecutors portrayed Stauffer as a controlling, violent man who couldn't accept rejection. The defense argued for life imprisonment, citing his age and lack of prior criminal history. The jury rejected these arguments, recommending death. Stauffer spent 36 years on death row, one of the longest waits in Oklahoma history. During his decades in prison, Stauffer maintained that the killings were a crime of passion, not premeditated murder. He exhausted all appeals, with courts consistently upholding his sentence. Stauffer did not request a special last meal in time and was served the standard prison meal. His final words were, "My request is that my Father forgive them. Thank you." At 10:16 a.m., Stauffer was pronounced dead. His execution came after Oklahoma resumed executions, following a 6-year hiatus due to problematic lethal injection procedures. Carl Wayne Bunchon, 78. State, Texas. On April 21, 2022, 78-year-old Carl Wayne Bunchon was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas, making him the oldest person executed in Texas in the modern era. Bunchon's crime occurred on June 27, 1990, during what started as a routine traffic stop in Houston. Officer James Irby, a 37-year-old motorcycle officer and father of 2, pulled Bunchon over for a traffic violation. As Officer Irby spoke with Bunchon's passenger, Bunchon emerged from the car and shot the officer once in the head. As Irby lay on the ground, Bunchon shot him twice more in the back, ensuring his death. This wasn't Bunchon's first murder. In 1961, he had been convicted of killing a man during a robbery and served time in prison. He was on parole for that crime when he murdered Officer Irby. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including testimony from multiple witnesses who saw the shooting. Bunchon's extensive criminal history, which included numerous assaults and robberies, sealed his fate with the jury. During his 32 years on death row, Bunchon became the oldest inmate in Texas's death row population. His attorneys argued that executing someone of his advanced age and declining health served no legitimate purpose. His final words acknowledged his victim. "I wanted the Irby family to know one thing. I do have remorse for what I did. I pray to God that they get the closure for me killing their father and Miss Irby's husband. To all of my friends that stuck with me through all of these years, I am not going to say goodbye, just saying so long. I am ready to go to heaven, Warden." Bunchon was pronounced dead at 6:39 p.m., ending one of the longest stays on Texas's death row. John B. Nixon, 77. State, Mississippi. On December 14, 2005, 77-year-old John B. Nixon became the oldest person executed in Mississippi since the 1970s, ending a life marked by violence and a crime committed at age 57. Nixon's crime occurred on January 22, 1985, in Rankin County, Mississippi. He had been hired by Elster Ponthieu to kill Ponthieu's ex-wife, Virginia Tucker, over a dispute involving their son's trust fund worth approximately $100,000. Nixon entered the Tucker home with 2 accomplices, his son John Nixon Jr. and Gilbert Jimenez. When Nixon pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and said, "I brought y'all something," Thomas Tucker, who had married Virginia just 6 months earlier, immediately guessed that the men had been hired by his wife's ex-husband. Thomas Tucker desperately offered Nixon money to spare their lives, but Nixon coldly replied, "That's not what I'm after. The deal's already been made." Nixon and one of his associates then shot at Thomas Tucker, who managed to escape despite being hit twice. Nixon then took the gun back from Jimenez and executed Virginia Tucker, holding the gun 1 inch behind her ear and firing a shot into her head while Jimenez held her down. The 3 men fled the scene, but Thomas Tucker survived the ordeal and identified Nixon as the shooter. Police quickly unraveled the murder-for-hire plot. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Gilbert Jimenez testified against the others and received a 20-year sentence. Nixon's sons, Henry Leon Nixon and John B. Nixon Jr., were convicted on lesser charges for their involvement in the murder plot. Elster Joseph Ponthieu, who had hired the killers for just $1,000, was convicted of capital murder but received a life sentence. It took the jury only half an hour to find Nixon guilty, and just 1.5 hours to determine the sentence should be death. During his 20 years on death row, Nixon exhausted all appeals. His lawyers argued that executing a 77-year-old man who posed no threat served no purpose, but courts rejected these arguments. For his last meal, Nixon requested a well-done T-bone steak, buttered asparagus spears, a baked potato with sour cream, pecan pie, and vanilla ice cream. His final words were, "I'm sorry for what I've done. I'm sorry to the world, I'm sorry for myself, and I'm sorry to the family. I did not kill Virginia Tucker. I know within my heart, and it hurts to acknowledge, that it was a son of mine and a Spanish friend, and another man from Jackson." Despite these final words attempting to shift blame, the evidence clearly showed Nixon had pulled the trigger that killed Virginia Tucker. He was pronounced dead at 6:25 p.m. Clarence Ray Allen, 76. State, California. On January 17, 2006, 76-year-old Clarence Ray Allen was executed at San Quentin State Prison, becoming the second oldest person executed in the United States since reinstatement of capital punishment. Allen's case was unique. He orchestrated murders from behind bars while already serving a life sentence for another killing. In 1974, Allen owned a security company and had insider knowledge of Fran's Market in Fresno, having installed their alarm system. He planned a burglary of the store, using his son to steal keys from the owner's son during a swimming party. The burglary netted about $500 in cash and $10,000 in money orders. But when 17-year-old Mary Sue Kitts, who had helped cash the stolen money orders, confided in someone about the crime, Allen decided she had to be eliminated. He first attempted to have her killed with cyanide-laced drugs, but when that failed, he ordered an accomplice to strangle her. Her body was dumped in the Friant-Kern Canal and never recovered. In 1977, Allen was convicted of Kitts' murder based on accomplice testimony and sentenced to life in prison. But from his cell at Folsom State Prison, he plotted revenge against those who had testified against him. Allen convinced fellow inmate Billy Ray Hamilton, who was about to be paroled, to carry out the killings. He provided Hamilton with a hit list that included witnesses from his trial. On September 5, 1980, Hamilton walked into Fran's Market with a sawed-off shotgun. He executed Brian Schladewitz, who had testified against Allen, as well as 2 employees, Douglas White, aged 18, and Josephine Rocha, aged 17. During the massacre, 2 others, Joe Rios and Jack Abbott, were also injured but survived. By the time of his execution, Allen was legally blind, diabetic, confined to a wheelchair, and had survived a heart attack just months earlier. His lawyers argued that executing someone in his condition constituted cruel and unusual punishment. For his last meal, Allen requested buffalo steak, Kentucky Fried Chicken, sugar-free pecan pie, sugar-free vanilla ice cream, and whole milk. His final words were, "Hoka. Hey, it's a good day to die. Thank you very much. I love you all. Goodbye." At 12:38 a.m., Allen was pronounced dead, having spent nearly 24 years on death row for the murders he ordered from within prison walls. Murray Hooper, 76. State, Arizona. On November 16, 2022, 76-year-old Murray Hooper was executed by lethal injection at Florence State Prison in Arizona for murders committed more than 4 decades earlier. On December 31, 1980, Hooper and 2 accomplices, William Bracey and Edward McCall, were hired by Robert Cruz to kill Pat Redmond and his mother-in-law, Helen Phelps, in Phoenix. The motive was a business dispute. Cruz co-owned a printing business with Redmond and wanted him eliminated. The three men forced their way into the Redmond home on New Year's Eve. They bound Pat Redmond, his wife Marilyn, and Helen Phelps with tape before shooting each in the head. Pat Redmond and Helen Phelps died, but Marilyn survived to testify. Hooper, Bracy, and McCall were all convicted and sentenced to death. However, Bracy died on death row, McCall's sentence was reduced to life, and Cruz, who ordered the hits, was acquitted in 3 trials. Hooper spent 42 years on death row, maintaining his innocence throughout. His case went through numerous appeals, with his lawyers arguing that crucial evidence had been withheld and that witness identifications were unreliable. For his last meal, Hooper requested 2 bacon cheeseburgers, French fries, and a vanilla milkshake. When asked to give his last words, Hooper said, "It's all been said, let it be done. To all my lawyers and loved ones, don't be sad for me. Don't cry. Don't say goodbye, but say, I'll see you later. Let's go." Hooper was pronounced dead at 10:34 a.m., ending one of the longest waits on Arizona's death row. James Hubard, 74. State: Alabama. On August 5, 2004, 74-year-old James Barney Hubard was executed by lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility in Alabama, becoming one of the oldest inmates executed in the state's history. Hubbard's crime occurred on January 10, 1977, in Tuscaloosa. He shot and killed 62-year-old Lillian Montgomery, a store clerk, during a robbery that netted less than $200. Montgomery had been working alone at the store when Hubard entered demanding money. After she complied and gave him the contents of the cash register, Hubard shot her 3 times, leaving her to die on the store floor. This wasn't Hubbard's first violent crime. He had a lengthy criminal record dating back to the 1940s, including convictions for robbery and assault. He was on parole at the time of Montgomery's murder. During his 27 years on death row, Hubard became known as the grandfather of Alabama's death row due to his age. He spent his time reading, watching television, and corresponding with pen pals. For his last meal, Hubard requested fried chicken, French fries, coleslaw, banana pudding, and sweet tea. His final words expressed remorse. "I apologize to the victim's family. I'm sorry for all the pain I've caused. I'm ready to go home to the Lord." Hubard was pronounced dead at 6:16 p.m. Brandon Aster Jones, 72. State: Georgia. On February 3, 2016, 72-year-old Brandon Aster Jones was executed at Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, having spent 36 years on death row, one of the longest waits in U.S. history. Jones's crime occurred on June 17, 1979, at a Texaco gas station in suburban Atlanta. Jones and Van Roosevelt Solomon robbed the station, and during the robbery, they shot and killed station manager Roger Tackett. What made the crime particularly heinous was that Tackett, a 35-year-old father, was shot while complying with the robbers' demands. He had already given them the money when Jones shot him in the arms, legs, and head. Both men were convicted and sentenced to death. Solomon was executed in 1985, but Jones's case dragged on for decades through various appeals and legal challenges. During his 36 years on death row, Jones became a published writer of essays and articles, and 2 manuscripts of historical fiction and autobiography. Jones declined to request a last meal and was instead given the standard prison menu of chicken and rice, rutabagas, seasoned turnip greens, dry white beans, cornbread, bread pudding, and fruit punch. Jones declined to make a final statement and instead agreed to have a prayer read. The lethal injection began at 12:29 a.m. Jones was pronounced dead at 1:17 a.m., ending one of the longest stays on America's death row. Thomas Eugene Creech, 74, ongoing. State, Idaho. As of 2025, 74-year-old Thomas Eugene Creech remains on Idaho's death row after surviving a failed execution attempt, having been imprisoned for 50 years. Creech was originally convicted of 5 murders across 3 states in the 1970s. He received his death sentence for the 1981 beating death of fellow inmate David Dale Jensen at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. On February 28, 2024, Idaho attempted to execute Creech by lethal injection. However, after 8 failed attempts to establish an IV line over nearly an hour, the execution was called off. Medical staff were unable to find suitable veins in his arms or legs. Creech has spent more time on death row than almost any other American inmate. He has outlived judges, prosecutors, and even some of the victim's family members who sought his execution. His case continues to wind through the courts as Idaho determines whether to attempt execution again or if the failed attempt constitutes cruel and unusual punishment.
It was Hosier, her neighbor, waiting for her as she left her apartment for work.
David Hosier, 69. State, Missouri. On June 11, 2024, 69-year-old David Hosier was executed by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Missouri. Hosier's crimes occurred on September 28, 2009, when he killed Angela and Rodney Gilpin outside their apartment in Jefferson City. The murders were motivated by jealousy. Angela Gilpin had broken off her relationship with Hosier months earlier. Hosier drove from Indiana to Missouri with a cache of weapons. He waited in the parking lot until the couple returned home, then shot both victims multiple times. Angela was shot 7 times and Rodney 4 times. After the murders, Hosier fled to Oklahoma, where he was arrested following a high-speed chase and shootout with police. Officers found 15 guns in his car, including the murder weapon. At trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Hosier had stalked Angela Gilpin and made threats before the murders. The jury quickly convicted him and recommended death. For his last meal, Hosier requested a bacon cheeseburger, French fries, and a milkshake. His final words were, "I'm innocent, but I'm at peace. To Angela's family, I hope you can find peace." Hosier was pronounced dead at 6:11 p.m. Wesley Ira Perky, 68. State, Indiana, Federal. On July 16, 2020, 68-year-old Wesley Ira Perky became the second federal prisoner executed after a 17-year hiatus in federal executions. Perky's first murder occurred in 1998 when he killed 16-year-old Jennifer Long in Kansas City, Missouri, whose mother he had been dating. Perky sexually assaulted Jennifer before stabbing her to death and dismembering her body with a chainsaw. He then burned her remains and disposed of them in a septic pond. While serving a life sentence for that murder, Perky was sentenced to death for the killing of 80-year-old Mary Ruth Bales during a robbery at her home in Kansas. He had beaten her to death with a claw hammer. Perky's lawyers argued he suffered from severe mental illness, including schizophrenia and dementia. They claimed he believed his execution was part of a conspiracy and that his body would be used for experiments. Despite these arguments and last-minute legal challenges, the Supreme Court allowed the execution to proceed. For his last meal, Perky requested pecan pie and vanilla ice cream. His final words reflected his mental state. "This sanitized murder really does not serve no purpose whatsoever. Thank you." Perky was pronounced dead at 8:19 a.m. at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. Lester Leroy Bauer, Jr., 67. State, Texas. On June 3, 2015, 67-year-old Lester Leroy Bauer Jr. was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville after spending 31 years on death row, one of the longest waits in Texas history. Bauer's crimes occurred on October 8, 1983, at a ranch in Sherman, Texas. He killed 4 men: Bob Tate, Philip Good, Jerry Brown, and Ronald Mays. The victims were found shot execution-style in an airplane hangar. The murders remained unsolved for nearly 2 years until Bauer's ex-wife contacted police. Bauer had stolen an ultralight aircraft from the hangar, and investigators linked him to the crime scene through various pieces of evidence. At trial, prosecutors argued Bauer killed the men to steal the aircraft he had been trying to purchase. Bauer claimed he had acted in self-defense during a drug deal gone bad, but the jury rejected this story. During his 3 decades on death row, Bauer maintained his innocence, claiming the real killers were drug dealers. His case went through numerous appeals, with courts consistently upholding his conviction. His final words maintained his innocence. "I'm innocent. I did not kill those men. I've said this for 31 years. I'll say it again. I'm innocent." Bauer was pronounced dead at 6:36 p.m. Carlton Garry, 67. State, Georgia. On March 15, 2018, 67-year-old Carlton Garry, known as the Columbus Stocking Strangler, was executed by lethal injection at Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison. Between 1977 and 1978, Garry terrorized Columbus, Georgia, breaking into the homes of elderly women, sexually assaulting them, and strangling them with their own stockings. He killed at least 7 women, all between the ages of 55 and 89. Garry targeted wealthy white women living in the historic Winton neighborhood. He would break in through windows or doors, attack his victims in their beds, and ransack their homes for valuables. The crimes stopped when Garry moved away from Columbus, but he was eventually linked to the murders through fingerprint evidence when arrested for robbery in 1984. DNA evidence later confirmed his involvement. At trial, Garry claimed he was being framed by racist police officers. However, the evidence was overwhelming, including fingerprints at multiple crime scenes and items stolen from victims found in his possession. During his 34 years on death row, Garry continued to proclaim his innocence, despite additional DNA testing in 2007 that further implicated him in the murders. For his last meal, Garry requested corn dogs, French fries, and a vanilla milkshake. His final words maintained his innocence. "I want to say, I'm innocent. I did not commit these murders. I'll see you on the other side." Garry was pronounced dead at 10:33 p.m., finally bringing closure to one of Georgia's most terrifying crime sprees. Elias Sirriani, 67. State, North Carolina. On November 18, 2005, 67-year-old Elias Hannah Sirriani was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. Sirriani's crime occurred on July 28, 1990. He drove to the home of his wife, Teresa Yusuf Sirriani, who had recently filed for divorce, and waited in her driveway. When she returned from work, he blocked her access with his van, and through her open car window, Sirriani stabbed Teresa 28 times with a screwdriver in front of their 10-year-old son, John, in the passenger seat. John tried to stop his father but was unable to. One neighbor who saw Teresa in the car said that it looked like she had been hit in the face with buckshot. Teresa survived for 28 days before succumbing to a 3-inch deep wound to her brain. At trial, Sirriani claimed he had only intended to talk to his wife about reconciliation, but the evidence showed premeditation. He had brought the screwdriver with him and waited for hours for her to return home. Before Teresa's death, Sirriani was charged with assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill. However, this charge was upgraded to capital murder after her death. On June 12, 1991, Elias Sirriani was sentenced to death at the Mecklenburg County Superior Court. During his 15 years on death row, he expressed remorse for his actions and corresponded with his children, trying to rebuild relationships. For his last meal, Sirriani requested pizza, lasagna, and orange juice. His final words were, "I want to thank God first for everything that happened in my life. I want to thank my children. I want to thank my family, especially my sister Odette. I want to thank all the beautiful friends who share with me my sufferings for 15 years and 4 months, and they so encouraged me, specifically Mr. and Mrs. Meg Eggleston, who become a sister to me. She helped me a lot to accept everything. I thank everyone from the staff, nurses, chaplains. I thank everyone." Sirriani was pronounced dead at 2:11 a.m. Frank Jarvis Atwood, 66. State, Arizona. On June 8, 2022, 66-year-old Frank Jarvis Atwood was executed by lethal injection at Florence State Prison in Arizona for the 1984 murder of 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. On September 17, 1984, Vicki disappeared while riding her bicycle to mail a birthday card for her aunt. Her pink bicycle was found abandoned in the desert with Atwood's car paint on it. Vicki's remains were discovered 7 months later in the desert. Atwood was on parole for lewd and lascivious acts, as well as charges for the kidnapping of an 8-year-old boy in California. In May 1984, he was paroled from the kidnapping sentence and moved to Tucson, Arizona. Atwood was arrested when investigators matched paint from Vicki's bicycle to his car and found her bracelet in his vehicle. The case haunted Tucson for decades, and Atwood maintained his innocence throughout his 35 years on death row, claiming he was framed. However, multiple appeals courts upheld his conviction. For his last meal, Atwood requested a ribeye steak, baked potato, salad, and apple pie. His final words proclaimed innocence. "Thank you, precious Father, for coming today and shepherding me into the faith. I pray the Lord have mercy on all of us. I pray the Lord have mercy on me." Atwood was pronounced dead at 10:16 a.m. Danny Bible, 66. State, Texas. On June 27, 2018, 66-year-old Danny Paul Bible, known as the Ice Pick Killer, was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville for a murder committed nearly 40 years earlier. Bible's execution was for the May 1979 murder of 20-year-old Inez Deaton, a neighbor who had visited Bible's home to use his telephone. Upon entering the house, Bible immediately grabbed her and demanded intercourse. When Deaton refused, he forcibly tore off her clothes and assaulted her. As she resisted the attack, Bible strangled and eventually resorted to stabbing her with an ice pick. After inflicting 11 wounds to the head and chest, Bible put the body of Inez in his car and then drove to a nearby bayou, where he abandoned it. But Bible was suspected in multiple other murders and sexual assaults across Montana and Louisiana. In North Texas, he murdered his sister-in-law, baby son, and her roommate, all on the same day in 1983. Bible wasn't charged with Deaton's murder until 1998, when improved DNA technology linked him to the crime. By then, he was already serving a 25-year sentence for another murder. During his time on death row, Bible's health deteriorated significantly. By the time of his execution, he was in a wheelchair and required supplemental oxygen for his lung disease. While he refused to give any final words, reporters claimed to have heard the words, "It hurts," and "burning," after the lethal injection began. Bible was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m. Clarence Wayne Dixon, 66. State, Arizona. On May 11, 2022, 66-year-old Clarence Wayne Dixon was executed by lethal injection at Florence State Prison, becoming the first person executed in Arizona in nearly 8 years. Dixon's crime occurred on January 7, 1978, when he raped and murdered 21-year-old Arizona State University student Deanna Beaudoin in her Tempe apartment. The case went unsolved for decades until DNA evidence linked Dixon to the murder in 2001. At the time of Beaudoin's murder, Dixon was on bail for sexually assaulting another ASU student just 2 days earlier. He had a long history of sexual violence and mental illness. Dixon's execution was controversial due to his severe mental illness. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and believed the government had implanted microchips in his body. His lawyers argued he was too mentally ill to be executed. Despite these arguments, courts ruled Dixon was competent enough to understand why he was being executed. For his last meal, Dixon requested Kentucky Fried Chicken, a half pint of strawberry ice cream, and a bottle of water. His final words reflected his mental state. "Maybe I'll see you on the other side, Donna. I don't know you, and I don't remember you." Dixon was pronounced dead at 10:30 a.m. Donnie Cleveland Lance, 66. State, Georgia. On January 29, 2020, 66-year-old Donnie Cleveland Lance was executed by lethal injection at Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison for the murders of his ex-wife and her boyfriend. Lance's crimes occurred on November 8, 1997, in Jackson County, Georgia. He killed his ex-wife, Sabrina Lance, and her boyfriend, Dwight Butch Wood Jr., shooting both multiple times at Wood's home. The murders were the culmination of a bitter custody dispute. Lance had been ordered to pay child support and was angry about the divorce. He went to Wood's home armed with a shotgun and killed both victims in front of witnesses. Lance's execution was delayed multiple times due to legal challenges about Georgia's lethal injection protocol and the secrecy surrounding its drug suppliers. During his 22 years on death row, Lance maintained that he acted in self-defense, claiming Wood had threatened him. However, witnesses testified that Lance was the aggressor. His last meal consisted of 2 chili steak burgers, French fries, onion rings, mustard, ketchup, and a soda. When asked for final words, he simply said, "No." Lance was pronounced dead at 9:05 p.m. Richard Norman Rogem Jr., 66. State, Oklahoma. On June 27, 2024, 66-year-old Richard Norman Rogem Jr. was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary for the 1984 kidnapping, rape, and murder of his 7-year-old former stepdaughter. Rogem's victim was Layla Dawn Cummings, the daughter of his ex-wife. On July 7, 1984, Rogem abducted Layla from her apartment in Elk City, Oklahoma. Her body was found in a field 2 weeks later. The crime shocked the community, particularly because Rogem had previously served prison time for raping 2 teenage girls in Michigan. He had been released just months before, killing Layla. DNA evidence and Rogem's fingerprints on a cup found near Layla's body linked him to the crime. He was arrested in Michigan and extradited to Oklahoma for trial. During his 40 years on death row, one of the longest waits in Oklahoma history, Rogem exhausted all appeals. His lawyers argued that executing him after 4 decades amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. For his final meal, Rogem requested 2 small double-cheese, double-pepperoni pizzas from Little Caesars, 2 cups of vanilla ice cream, and a bottle of Werner's ginger ale. When asked if he had any last words, Richard Rogem said, "I don't. I've said my goodbyes." Rogem was pronounced dead at 10:16 a.m. Oba Chandler. State, Florida. On November 15, 2011, 65-year-old Oba Chandler was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison for one of the most notorious crimes in Tampa Bay history. On June 1, 1989, Chandler met Joan Rogers and her two teenage daughters, Michelle and Christy, who were on vacation from Ohio. He offered to take them on a sunset boat cruise in Tampa Bay. Instead, Chandler raped the women, tied concrete blocks to their necks, and threw them overboard while they were still alive. Their bodies were found floating in the bay 3 days later. The case went unsolved for 3 years until police matched Chandler's handwriting to directions he had given the Rogers family. DNA evidence later confirmed his involvement. At trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Chandler had attempted similar crimes with other women. The jury recommended death after deliberating just 2 hours. During his 17 years on death row, Chandler maintained his innocence, claiming he was being framed. He refused to attend his own execution initially, but was forced to comply. For his last meal, Chandler requested fried chicken, French fries, and strawberry ice cream. While refusing to give any final spoken words, Oba Chandler did deliver a written last statement maintaining his innocence. "You are killing an innocent man today." Chandler was pronounced dead at 4:25 p.m., bringing closure to a case that had haunted Florida for over 2 decades. John Errol Ferguson, 65. State, Florida. On August 5, 2013, 65-year-old John Errol Ferguson was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison, despite severe mental illness that had him believing he was the Prince of God. Ferguson's crimes occurred during a violent 8-month period in 1977 and 1978. His most heinous act was on July 27, 1977, when he and 2 accomplices entered a Carroll City home and executed 6 people. The victims were tied up and shot in the head one by one. 6 months later, Ferguson murdered 17-year-old Brian Glenfelt and 17-year-old Belinda Worley during a robbery at a lover's lane in Hialeah. He shot both teenagers in the head after robbing them of just $30. Ferguson was convicted of 8 murders total and sentenced to death. During his 35 years on death row, his mental state deteriorated significantly. He believed he was immortal, had 13 children with the Virgin Mary, and would return to Earth after his execution to save the world. His lawyers argued vigorously that executing someone so mentally ill violated the Constitution. Multiple psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia and other severe mental illnesses. Despite these arguments, courts ruled Ferguson understood he was being executed for murders, even if he held delusional beliefs about what would happen afterward. For his last meal, Ferguson requested a big chicken country fried sandwich and sweet tea. His final words reflected his delusions. "I am the Prince of God." Ferguson was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m. Robert Joseph Long, 65. State, Florida. On May 23, 2019, 65-year-old Robert Joseph Long, known as Bobby Joe Long, was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison for a murder spree that terrorized the Tampa Bay area in 1984. Over an 8-month period in 1984, Long kidnapped, raped, and murdered at least 10 women in the Tampa area. His victims were typically sex workers or women he found alone at night. He would strangle them and dump their bodies in remote areas. Long's reign of terror ended when one victim, 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh, survived. She had been kidnapped, raped, and held captive for 26 hours, but convinced Long to release her by talking about his life and showing empathy. McVeigh's detailed description of her ordeal and observations during captivity led police directly to Long. When arrested, he confessed to the murders in graphic detail, showing no remorse. At trial, Long pleaded guilty to 8 murders and was sentenced to death for the murder of Michelle Sims. He received multiple life sentences for the other killings. During his 35 years on death row, Long rarely gave interviews and showed little emotion about his crimes. DNA evidence continued to link him to unsolved murders even after his conviction.
I'm not proud of anything I've done. And the worst thing is I don't understand why. I don't understand why.
For his last meal, Long requested roast beef, bacon, French fries, and soda. He made no final statement. Robert Joseph Long was pronounced dead at 6:55 p.m., with several victims' family members and Lisa McVeigh in attendance. Keith Edmund Gavin, 64. State, Alabama. On July 18, 2024, 64-year-old Keith Edmund Gavin was executed by lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility in Alabama for a murder committed during a robbery in 1998. Gavin's crime occurred on March 6, 1998, in Cherokee County, Alabama. He shot and killed 68-year-old William Clinton Clayton, Jr., a delivery driver, during a robbery that netted just $580. Clayton had stopped at an ATM to withdraw money for his business when Gavin approached him with a gun. After Clayton handed over the money, Gavin shot him in the face, leaving him to die in his van. This wasn't Gavin's first murder. He was on parole for a 1979 murder when he killed Clayton. His criminal history included numerous violent offenses spanning decades. At trial, prosecutors emphasized Gavin's pattern of violence and the senseless nature of killing Clayton after he had complied with the robbery. The jury quickly recommended death. During his 26 years on death row, Gavin became a devout Muslim and expressed remorse for his crimes. He spent his time reading religious texts and corresponding with family. Gavin refused a final meal, but did end up having ice cream and Mountain Dew as a snack. His final words were, "I love my family." Gavin was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m. Richard Snell, 64. State, Arkansas. On April 19, 1995, 64-year-old Richard Wayne Snell was executed by lethal injection at Cummins Unit in Arkansas, on the same day as the Oklahoma City bombing. Snell's execution was for the June 30, 1984, murder of Bill Stump, a pawnshop owner in Texarkana, Arkansas. Snell shot Stump during a robbery, believing the Jewish shop owner was part of a conspiracy against white Christians. But Snell had also killed Arkansas State Trooper Lewis Bryant during a traffic stop in 1983. Bryant, who was black, was shot 5 times. Snell was a member of the white supremacist group, the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. His execution date coincidentally fell on the 2nd anniversary of the Waco siege, and the same day as the Oklahoma City bombing. Some conspiracy theorists tried to link Snell to Timothy McVeigh, though no credible connection existed. During his 11 years on death row, Snell remained unrepentant, continuing to espouse racist and anti-government views. He predicted there would be hell to pay on his execution day. His final words were defiant. "Governor Tucker, look over your shoulder. Justice is coming. I wouldn't trade places with you or any of your cronies. Hell has victories. I am at peace." Snell was pronounced dead at 9:10 p.m., just hours after the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people. Joseph Paul Franklin, 63. State, Missouri. On November 20th, 2013, 63-year-old Joseph Paul Franklin, also known as the Racist Killer, was executed by lethal injection at Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Missouri, ending the life of one of America's most notorious racist serial killers. Franklin, born James Clayton Vaughn, Jr., changed his name in honor of Benjamin Franklin and Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels. Between 1977 and 1980, he traveled across the country killing people in a twisted mission to start a race war. Franklin targeted interracial couples, Jewish people, and black men. His confirmed victims numbered at least 11, though he claimed to have killed up to 20 people. His victims included Gerald Gordon, a synagogue member in St. Louis whom Franklin was executed for killing. His most famous attack was the 1978 shooting of Hustler magazine publisher Larry Flynt, who was paralyzed from the waist down. Franklin shot Flynt because his magazine featured interracial pornography. He also shot civil rights leader Vernon Jordan in 1980, though Jordan survived. Franklin later confessed to both shootings from prison. Captured in 1980, Franklin was convicted of multiple murders and received 6 life sentences plus death. During his time in prison, he expressed no remorse and maintained his racist beliefs. He made no last written or verbal statement and did not request a last meal. Franklin was pronounced dead at 6:17 a.m. Even Larry Flynt, despite being paralyzed by Franklin, had opposed his execution on anti-death penalty grounds. John Ruthell Henry, 63. State, Florida. On June 18, 2014, 63-year-old John Ruthell Henry was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison for the murder of his estranged wife. Henry's crime occurred on December 23, 1985, in Pasco County, Florida. He stabbed his estranged wife, Suzanne Henry, to death in front of their 5-year-old son, Eugene. The murder was the culmination of a bitter divorce and custody battle. Suzanne had obtained a restraining order against Henry, but he violated it repeatedly. On the day of the murder, he forced his way into her home and attacked her with a knife. Young Eugene witnessed the entire murder and later testified against his father. The trauma of seeing his mother killed had lasting effects on the boy's life. At trial, prosecutors presented evidence of Henry's history of domestic violence and violations of court orders. The jury recommended death, finding the murder especially heinous due to the child witness. During his 28 years on death row, Henry maintained that he had acted in a moment of passion, not premeditation. He expressed remorse and tried to maintain a relationship with his son through letters. Henry declined a last meal, and his final words were, "I can't undo what I've done. If I could, I would. I ask for your forgiveness if you can find it in your heart." John Ruthell Henry was pronounced dead at 7:43 p.m. Charles Russell Rhines, 63. State, South Dakota. On November 4, 2019, 63-year-old Charles Russell Rhines was executed by lethal injection at the South Dakota State Penitentiary for a murder committed during a burglary in 1992. Rhines' victim was 22-year-old Donovan Schaefer, who worked at a Rapid City donut shop. On March 8, 1992, Rhines broke into the shop to rob it, but was surprised when Schaefer arrived early for work. Rhines tied up Schaefer and stabbed him multiple times. According to Rhines' own confession, he stabbed Schaefer in the head because the young man's crying was getting on his nerves. The case remained unsolved for months until Rhines' former roommate contacted police. Rhines had confessed to him, even joking about the murder. At trial, defense attorneys argued for life imprisonment, but prosecutors emphasized the cruel nature of the killing. The jury sentenced Rhines to death. Controversy arose during appeals when it was revealed that some jurors had expressed anti-gay bias, making homophobic remarks about sending Rhines, who was gay, to prison where he would enjoy being with men. Despite arguments that jury bias tainted his sentence, courts upheld the death penalty. Rhines spent 27 years on death row before execution. For his last meal, Rhines requested a veggie burger, French fries, and lemon pie. His final words were, "I am sorry to the Schaefer family. I hope they find peace." Rhines was pronounced dead at 7:39 p.m. in South Dakota's first execution in 7 years. Thomas Warren Weisenhant, 63. State, Alabama. On May 27, 2010, 63-year-old Thomas Warren Weisenhant was executed by lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility for a murder committed more than 3 decades earlier. Weisenhant's crime occurred on July 12, 1976, in Mobile County, Alabama. He kidnapped, raped, and murdered 72-year-old Gertrude Trudy Ellison during a home invasion robbery. Ellison lived alone, and Weisenhant targeted her believing she had money. After robbing her of just $35, he sexually assaulted her and shot her 3 times, leaving her body in a rural area. The case went cold until Weisenhant was arrested for another rape in 1977. He confessed to Ellison's murder and led police to evidence he had kept from the crime. At trial, Weisenhant claimed mental illness and childhood abuse as mitigating factors. However, the brutal nature of the crime against an elderly victim led the jury to recommend death. During his 33 years on death row, Weisenhant became a born-again Christian and expressed remorse. He counseled other inmates and participated in faith-based programs. For his last meal, Weisenhant requested fried catfish, potato salad, hush puppies, and pecan pie. His final words were, "I am sorry for what I did to Mrs. Ellison and her family. I have made peace with God. I'm ready." Weisenhant was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. John Battalia, 62. State, Texas. On February 1, 2018, 62-year-old John David Battalia was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville for murdering his 2 young daughters while their mother listened on the phone. Battalia's crime occurred on May 2, 2001, in his Dallas apartment. During a scheduled visit, he shot his daughters, 9-year-old Faith and 6-year-old Liberty, while forcing their mother, Mary Jean Pearl, to listen on the phone. The murders were revenge against Pearl for filing assault charges against him. Before shooting the girls, Battalia had Faith ask her mother, "Mommy, why do you want Daddy to have to go to jail?" After shooting both daughters, Battalia left the phone off the hook so Pearl could hear their final moments. He then went to a tattoo parlor and had roses tattooed on his arm with his daughters' names. At trial, Battaglia's history of domestic violence and mental illness was presented. However, the calculated cruelty of making their mother listen led the jury to sentence him to death. During his 17 years on death row, Battaglia's mental state deteriorated. His lawyers argued he was too delusional to be executed, claiming he believed the execution was a government conspiracy. His bizarre final words were, "Go ahead, please. Don't worry about it. I'll get my hands on a computer when I get back to my cell and I'll do the transcription myself." Battalia was pronounced dead at 9:40 p.m., with Mary Jean Pearl watching from the witness room. Betty Lou Beets, 62. State, Texas. On February 24th, 2000, 62-year-old Betty Lou Beets became the second woman executed in Texas since the Civil War, put to death for murdering her 5th husband for insurance money. Beets' victim was Jimmy Don Beets, a Dallas firefighter she married in 1982. On August 6, 1983, she shot him twice in the head while he slept, then buried his body under a wishing well in their front yard. For nearly 2 years, Beets collected Jimmy's pension and life insurance while telling friends he had disappeared. She was only caught when she tried to cash in another insurance policy, prompting investigators to search her property. Police not only found Jimmy's body, but also discovered the remains of her fourth husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, buried under a storage shed. He had been shot in 1981, also for insurance money. At trial, prosecutors portrayed Beets as a black widow who killed for profit. The defense argued she was a battered woman who killed in self-defense, presenting evidence of abuse. During her 15 years on death row, Beets maintained her innocence regarding Jimmy's death, claiming her son had killed him. However, physical evidence contradicted this claim. She did not request a final meal, nor did she make a final statement. Beets was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m., with pro- and anti-death penalty protesters gathered outside the prison. These cases represent the oldest individuals executed in modern American history. Men and women who either spent decades awaiting their fate or committed their crimes late in life. Which executions were justified? Which were cruel or unusual? Let me know your thoughts in the comments and what you would like to see next. Thank you for tuning in to Primetime Crime.